Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Ich bin ja, Herr, deiner Macht, which translates to, Great God, I own thy heavenly might. Kind of an interesting chorale, has a couple of unique moments about it. It definitely has a unique profile in terms of the way it sounds too, like the way the chords are voiced. Definitely sounds kind of like one of a kind. I haven't really encountered a chorale that's had this particular sound and look to it. There's just something about it. But all in all, really, there isn't too much to write home about. There is one point that's sort of a minute detail, but other than that, really, it's a fairly straightforward chorale. And we're just going to hop right into the analysis. So 2 flats in the key signature. We start on G minor. We end on G minor. Bit of an interesting detail there, the fact that we're in a minor key and we're ending on a minor chord. But another interesting note to that same effect is that with G minor specifically, we often see Bach use 1 flat as a key signature as well as 2 flats in the key signature. So this is a case where Bach is using 2 flats in the key signature. It ultimately depends on the number of occurrences of E flat throughout the chorale. In this case, it seemed more practical for Bach to use 2 flats in the key signature, and that's why a 2 flat key signature is present. After our tonic triad, we have G, we have C, E flat, and A, which is A minor 7 flat 5 over G, or 2-4-2. B flat is a passing tone, and we would expect this to go to some type of 5-6 chord, which it does. F sharp, A, D, and A. D major over F sharp. B flat's a passing tone, C is a neighboring 7th, and then we have G, G, D, and B flat, tonic triad, root position. Bit of an interesting moment here. We have a passing F sharp, passing A, and this D right here, and if we take that in conjunction with the D that's being held over the bar, we have a bit of a passing minor dominant, but because it's in passing, and this is sort of like a descending minor scale, lots of times we see natural descending minor as opposed to natural melodic minor going down with the raised scale degrees. It just so happens that we have this passing D minor triad, which gives sort of like an old world stable sound where we don't get the leading tone present in the 5 chord. Bach does this from time to time. It's definitely unusual, but we do see Bach use it. Typically it's a stable chord that happens before another stable chord, and in this case we see it preceding E flat, B flat, G, and D, which appears to be an E flat major 7 chord, which is 6-7. D is a neighboring 7th. C is a passing tone here. B flat is a chord tone. And then we go to a very unusual half cadence here, where we have E flat, C, F sharp, and A, which is F sharp fully diminished 7th in 3rd inversion, because it's over the 3rd of the chord. We would expect this to go to a 3 chord in 1st inversion, but as we expect 4-2 chord basses to resolve, we expect them to resolve down by step, and I think the big picture here is that even though we have a subdivided chord progression here, B flat's a non-chord tone, G is a non-chord tone, this G is just a doubling up of what the alto is doing. The C is a chord tone, the only chord tone in this chord when compared to the chord that happens on the numbered beat, sorry, I had a hard time getting that out, is this C right here. We get a bit of a buffer chord because in between 7-4-2, or after 7-4-2 on the next beat, we get 5, D, A, D, and F sharp. So 2 chords here, 5 being sort of a sub for 3. In between the chords we have C, B flat, G, and G, which is C minor 7 in root position. That's a 4 chord, and often when we have 2 dominant chords that are in succession like this from numbered beat to numbered beat, we often have a buffer in between them, and 4 is one of the more common buffers that we see. So the big picture here is that E flat is resolving down to D, so the bass does resolve the way we would expect, but we're not seeing the chord that we would likely see after a 7-4-2 chord, which is 3-6. However, 3, 6, and 5 are very similar to one another. So after this sort of unusual 4-2 resolution, we get a phrase that gets some mid-phrase modulation action going on. It ends in an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F major, which sort of feels like a glorified half cadence in the key of B flat, but we do visit B flat a little bit before we modulate to F major, which really feels prevalent because of the E natural here in the melody, as well as the E natural in the bass. But we start off by going to the key of B flat. We start off with D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, and that takes us to G minor, G, D, G, and B flat. That's our tonic chord, which also happens to be our 6th chord, our submediant in the key of B flat major. And that takes us to A, C, F, and C, which is F major over A. That's 5-6. We see a very similar melodic shape to how we started the chorale, sort of just like some symmetry going on here between the two phrases. Even the alto looks like it's kind of doing the similar thing. In fact, all the voices really look like they're doing the same thing. If you looked at this from a distance, you'd be hard-pressed to say that these phrases weren't like A and A prime in terms of analyzing them formally. But Bach throws us for a loop here because of the E natural and how that changes the harmonic relationships between the two keys when comparatively we stay in G minor the whole time here, and here we move keys. So after 5-6 we go to 1 after a couple of non-chord tones, same places that we saw them in the first phrase. This E is a neighboring 7th, or E flat rather. Then we have B flat, F, and D. Tonic triad, root position. B flat's also a chord tone, we don't need to mark it. And in passing here we have A, C, and F is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. But I also think that this B flat chord here is where we modulate to the key of F, and it is now our 4 chord. We have a bit of a zone here. We could say that it modulates over this F chord. We could even say it modulates over this G minor chord, but it doesn't really feel like, to me at least, that it sounds like it's modulating until we hear the idea of this E natural. So after this passing A chord here in F chord here in first inversion, it's over A. That's what I was trying to say. That's 1-6. Bach takes us to G, D, B flat, and F, which is 2-7, G minor 7 in root position. F is a chord tone, E is a non-chord tone, D is a chord tone, and that takes us to E, G, C, and C. That's 5-6. C major over E, and then we get C, C, E, and B flat, all chord tones, but we have this B flat here. It's kind of like a passing 7 chord, but I feel like this is just counterpoint, not super important to analyze. Then we cadence on F major, F, C, F, and A. Tonic triad, root position, definitely more normative chord progression at the end of this phrase in comparison to what we get in the previous phrase. Moving ahead, we move to the key of D minor pretty much straight away. We start off with B flat, B flat, B flat, F, and D, which is our 4 chord in the key of F, and it also happens to be our 6 chord in the key of D minor. And then we get E, B flat, G, and C sharp, which is C sharp fully diminished 7th over E. That's 7-6-5. And that resolves to D minor, F, A, F, and D. Tonic triad, first inversion. And then we stay in the key of D minor for the rest of the phrase. C sharp, A, E, and E is A major over C sharp. That's 5-6. C sharp is a chord tone. F is a non-chord tone. G is a little neighboring 7th here, continuing this sort of rhythmic scheme that we've seen over the previous 2 phrases. Then we get D, A, D, and F here with a lot of space in between the alto and the melody. There was someone in one of my videos not too long ago in the last couple of weeks who asked a question about a particular chorale that had a lot of space in between the alto and the tenor, and it's not something I've been super privy to because of the fact that it's Bach is going to voice the way that he does, and I don't really think that that is it's taught as a rule in harmony classes to try and keep the voices within an octave of one another, and it makes sense because of, if someone's accompanying this chorale and playing all the voices, it's very difficult to play an octave, between the thumb and the pinky for some people, let alone an octave in between two of the voices between other fingers. Could be a challenge, so the fact that you have a 10th going on here could potentially lead to some issues when playing accompaniment, but also, the further two voices grow apart, the muddier the chord tends to sound, objectively speaking. But I don't tend to question Bach's methods because there's, he's the person we're studying, he's the master here, right? But I thought it was an interesting question, so when that comes up, sometimes it's something I catch, sometimes it's not, but here it's pretty obvious. It's our tonic triad though, D, A, D, and F. D is a chord tone, D is a chord tone, E flat, or E natural, sorry, is a passing tone or it's an anticipation actually, before we get A, D, E, and E. It's a 5 chord here, and as I've talked about recently, lots of 4-3 suspensions over 5 chords. In Bach, this D is just a 4-3 suspension. B is like sort of a lower neighbor, or like lower decoration here to the resolution. A, C sharp, G, and E. Almost neglected to mention this passing F as well. This would be just taking our 5 chord. I was about to rewrite the Roman numeral, we don't need to do that. We just put it in root position as a 7 chord. And then what's pretty interesting is Bach sort of self-realizes the repeat by ending with a major tonic triad. A, F sharp, and D. And apologies, this is not supposed to be an A. This is supposed to be a D. I forgot that got printed incorrectly. So this D right here, it's just a root position tonic triad that is a major chord and realizes the repeat because in the key of the minor dominant, Bach often ends with a major chord with that Picardy third in the middle of the chorale, and it'll eventually realize the key of the minor, just the tonic key that it is dominant to. Okay, next phrase ends in the key of C minor, imperfect authentic cadence. We're exploring a lot of keys in this chorale: G, B flat, F, D, C. The majority of the keys that are somewhat close in proximity on the circle of fifths to G minor. But we start off with F sharp, D, A, and D, which is just first inversion of this chord here, which is pretty cool because we know that this is a major tonic triad in the key of D. Typically speaking, if we were in the key of D minor and this were a D minor chord that had this F sharp here, I'd say it was a direct modulation, but because we're coming from the key of D and the previous D chord we heard was major, we can just use a Roman numeral to imply its inversion because the chord hasn't changed, fundamentally speaking, it's just changed in terms of its inversion. But this is going to be the point in which we modulate back to the key of G minor, where 1-6 now becomes 5-6, and then we go to G minor, G, D, G, and B flat. Tonic triad, root position, neighbor tone here. This A is sort of a pivot in between B flat and B natural, which implies that this chord is, this G triad is serving as a dominant. We have F, D, G, and B natural. More specifically, this is 5-4-2 of 4. Because G also happens to be the dominant of C. This is a dominant 7 chord. We would expect this to resolve to 4-6, which it does. E flat, C, G, and G. 4-6. So here's a 4-2 chord resolving the way we would expect, just like we see at the beginning of the chorale. Even though they don't always resolve that way, virtually they always do. And I do think this 4-6 chord is our gateway to the key of C minor. It's now our tonic, and on the beat we get another C minor chord, but similar to this rhythmic configuration that we have here in the first two phrases, we have A flat, C is a chord tone, E flat's a chord tone, we get a passing 6 chord, so the chords are different. I make that 6 look a little bit more 6-like. Even though the chords have been different under every circumstance, we have a similar rhythmic thing going on. 6 takes us to F, C, A flat, and D. It's a D minor 7 flat 5 over F. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. I think this is the first 2-6-5 chord we're seeing. And then pretty interestingly, D and F make an appearance, which takes the chord and puts it very briefly in root position. So we'll change the figure bass. That's something that I keep track of, when Bach subdivides the progression by taking a chord and respelling it, and whether or not the chord consists of all of the same tones it was previously spelled with. We would expect this to go to 5, which it does, G, B, G, and very interestingly we get a 6-5 suspension here with this E flat, which could potentially mean that this was like a, would that be like a 3-6 chord maybe? All in all, I don't think that's what's being implied. This E flat I feel is functioning as an accented non-chord tone, and really this D is what belongs to the chord before we cadence on C minor, C, C, G, and E flat. Tonic triad, root position, looking for a point to go back to the key of G minor, and with this F sharp here, I'm pretty inclined to believe that this C minor is also functioning as our 4, going in and out with the same chord, something that Bach does from time to time. I feel like in this case it's more coincidental than anything else. But we do end with a perfect authentic cadence, and like I mentioned earlier, it is a minor chord, so that's a pretty interesting detail because Bach often ends his minor chorales with the Picardy third. But after 4, we typically would expect to see 4 go to a dominant chord or a tonic chord. Here we see it go to a dominant functioning chord. We have C, we have D, we have F sharp, and we have A, which is another 4-2 chord, 5-4-2, and we would expect this to resolve to 1-6, which it does, B flat, D, G, and D. The bass resolves down by step, and the root is a 5th apart going down. That's pretty common of 4-2 chords in general. Like we've seen here, sometimes we don't see an exact resolution, or there is a variation of the resolution where just the bass resolves down by step, but typically speaking, this is how we see 4-2 chords resolve. F is a passing 7th, A is a neighbor tone, we then have B, flat, C, E natural, and G, another 4-2 chord, and this one's sort of a 4-2 chord in disguise because this C here is a chord tone, but really the destination of this B flat is the A on the next beat. So 4-2, we would expect this to resolve to 7-6, which it does, A, C, F sharp, and C. F sharp diminished over A, so we see a bunch of 4-2 chords, especially recently. In this chorale in particular, but also in recent chorales, we've been seeing 4-2 chords in droves, and they've all, for the most part, been analyzed, or they've all resolved the way that we would expect them to, which is really neat because there aren't too many instances of sort of these universal truths or close to universal truths in music. There are always exceptions to the rule, even if they are mostly universal, but this is about as close to a universal rule as you'll encounter in, this type of music, which is pretty exciting. We would expect 7-6 to go to 1. One of the most common subdivided chord progression is some type of combination of 4, 7, and 1. Most of the time it's the 4 and the 7 that's subdivided, but here we see the 7 and the 1 being subdivided. Not a huge deal. We see this configuration a lot of those chords. So G, B flat, G, and D are all non-chord tones. This E flat here, very similar to the pattern that we've seen previously, is just a neighboring 7th. We've seen it a bunch here. But this is G minor in root position, or tonic triad. This takes us to F sharp, A, and D, which is D major over F sharp. That's 5-6. D is a chord tone. C is a passing 7th. This takes us to 1, G, D, A, and B flat, this A being a 9/8 suspension over the bass. It's very common to see tonic triads have a 9/8 suspension over them. Bach does it a lot with D minor chords especially, but Bach really doesn't discriminate. He just does it over tonic triads a lot just because that's how the voice leading often works. And then this takes us to 5, D, C, F sharp, and A, I guess more specifically 5-7. B flat here is an anticipation, and G here is an anticipation before we cadence on G minor, G, B flat, D, and G, and that's today's analysis. So really a fairly straightforward chorale. We got some mid-phrase modulation going on here. We have an irregular 4-2 resolution here where we see 7-4-2 resolved to 5. It's almost like a Phrygian half cadence actually, and I should mark that as a Phrygian half cadence. Apologies for not marking that. It's very interesting to see a 7-4-2 chord here because really this breaks my rule. Another one of these generally universal rules is that it's typically a 4-6 chord, and even though there is 4 somewhat in the mix, and I guess you could make an argument that the whole picture is that a 4 chord's being implied, there's really no denying the fact that there is a fully voiced F-sharp fully diminished 7th chord happening on this beat. With all the voices moving at the same time, it's harder to make the argument that 4-6 is being implied for the entirety of the gesture. So very exciting to see a Phrygian half cadence that doesn't use 4-6. The 7-4-2 irregular resolution, mid-phrase modulation, that's less unusual. We see that all the time. Tonic operating as 5-4 is always interesting as well. Not so much in minor keys because you have to change the minor chord to a major chord in order for that to happen. It's much more interesting in major keys when you have to add that flat 7, then it resolves that way, gives it a bit of a modal sound. But really the rest of the chorale is functional and operates the way that one would expect. With all that being said, if you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video as well. Also, before I say my last couple lines about the video, I want to thank you all so much for 200 plus subscribers. I hadn't been checking my YouTube panel in the last couple of weeks, and I saw that my subscribers jumped up by like 30 or something, which is absolutely crazy. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by subscribing and watching my videos. It's really cool that people are going along on the journey with me, and as the channel grows, I really hope to I'm going to continue delivering Bach content daily, but this journey is going to come to an end at some point, and I'm still brainstorming what I want to do with the channel. I have some ideas for the immediate wake, but I still want this to be an analysis-focused channel. So thank you so much for continuing to support my channel by watching my videos. And thank you so much for watching this video in particular. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.